everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel, and today we are going to be talking about some of my favorite books that I feel are a little bit underhyped. So some of these books aren't exactly underhyped, they're just not talked about as much as I think that they should be talked about, and other books are just super underhyped as it is. And other books are from like 5 years ago that I feel need to make a comeback. Also, these favorites are in no particular order, I just wanted to make that clear. So the first book that I want to talk about is Like Water by Rebecca Potos, and I read this book last year for the Latinx Book Bingo Readathon, and I absolutely fell in love with this book. It's definitely very different from a lot of other books that I've read before. It's very character-driven rather than plot-driven, so if you're looking for a book with some really great strong characters and good representation, I would definitely recommend this book. So this book is about Savannah, and she lives in New Mexico with her family, and when she finds out that her dad has Huntington's disease, she has to start working a lot more and kind of feels like she has to give up her dream of going to college and moving out of their small town. Then when she starts working at a water park, she meets someone named Lee, and they end up getting along really well and kind of forging this unlikely friendship and relationship, and it's really, really beautiful, and the writing is absolutely gorgeous. I love getting to know more about Savannah and Lee and the way that they work together and how different they are but how similar they are at the same time, and it's really interesting to get to read about a small town that feels really, really developed. Like the town almost acts as a character itself, and I really love reading about small towns. I don't think I've ever grown up in a really, really small town, but I have grown up in really small places, and I could definitely relate to this book, feeling like you're trapped, feeling like everyone else is trapped there, like it's just a cycle. And I felt like this book definitely needed more hype. It's really beautiful, and I just love the writing. There's definitely queer representation, so if you're looking for that, this is a book for you. Latinx representation, also a book for you, and definitely a book that you need to keep on your radar, especially for this year for the Latinx Book Bingo Readathon, because we're gonna do it again. And this is definitely a book that I recommend you either wait until then or you just read it right now. It is so good. The next book also has some Latinx representation, and that is Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova. This book is an urban fantasy about a bruja named Alex, and she is about to experience her death day celebration, but she doesn't really want to be a bruja, and she doesn't really want to experience her powers, which she hasn't really gotten control of yet. So when she's trying to get rid of her powers and everything goes wrong, all of her family and everyone she loves gets sent to Los Lagos, which is basically an underworld, and she has to team up with this boy she just met to bring them all back to the real world. So I absolutely loved this book. I loved Alex as a character. This is a really, really great introduction to urban fantasy, and it's definitely one of the urban fantasies that I actually really enjoy. It's not really a genre that I normally go to, but this one is definitely an exception, and I absolutely loved this book. It has good representation of bisexuality and has a female-female romance, and it is just absolutely fantastic. This is one I'm really surprised more people don't talk about, because it seems like it should be up a lot of people's alleys, that a lot of people would really enjoy it. And also with Bruja Born just having come out, I'm really surprised that this doesn't get a lot more hype than it does, and I would love to see more people read and talk about this book. So far we're seeing a little bit of a trend with some queer literature, and the next book is Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. And this is a book about a queer girl who is living in Los Angeles, and she ends up becoming a set designer for kind of like a little indie movie, and she's trying to get over her ex-girlfriend whom she really loved, but the relationship wasn't exactly as healthy as it could have been. And then she also meets this new girl who she is starting to have feelings for, but she's not really sure if they're on the same page. Basically, this book is amazing if you're really into LA or movies or things like that. It definitely is one of my favorite representations of Los Angeles I've ever read. I feel like a lot of books kind of characterize Los Angeles as a place that is really petty or superficial, and that has not really been my experience with LA, having lived in California my entire life. And I know a lot of other people who are actually from Los Angeles who would definitely agree that it's not the way that most people represent Los Angeles. So it's really nice to see a book that is actually kind of taking a really realistic and down-to-earth look at Los Angeles, and I know that Nina LaCour is from California, so I think she has a better perspective than a lot of other authors who aren't from California. Also in this book, Emmy, the main character, is given her brother's apartment for the summer, and she is told basically from her brother to do whatever she wants and to have fun and to kind of have an adventure, and she definitely does this within this book. She ends up finding a letter from a really famous director from Hollywood, and I think he used to make like Western movies, and it's this really great mystery about who his daughter is and who his granddaughter is, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. The writing is so beautiful and so atmospheric, and it also goes in a lot to the movie making process, which is really interesting as well. And I think that if you're looking for a really great sapphic read, this is definitely one that you should start off with. This was my first sapphic read, and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love. And Nina LaCour is one of my all-time favorite writers, and she is just absolutely amazing. This next one is one I definitely hear like almost no one talk about, and it's The Ring and the Crown by Melissa de la Cruz, and it is one of my all-time favorite fantasies. Basically, it is kind of an alternative history fantasy, which is really interesting. There's a lot of magic in it and a lot of political intrigue, and it's set, I think, kind of around like England and France and things like that. So it does have some historical elements in it, but it also has a lot of fantasy elements, and I just absolutely loved every character that we follow. There's so many interesting plot lines and storylines and characters, and they all intertwine and work well together, and it's such a beautifully told story. This was one of the first like historical fiction fantasies that I've ever read, and it was done so well. I absolutely love Melissa de la Cruz's writing. It's kind of a hard plot to explain. So basically there's this princess, and she was born kind of sick, and her mother is like over 100 years old, like I think over 150 years old. And then there is her friend-ish kind of person who is the daughter of the sorcerer, and there's a lot of magic and, like I said, political intrigue, and it's just such a fun book, and it's so beautifully written, and I just absolutely love this book. It was supposed to have a sequel, and I'm pretty sure the sequel was written, but it was never released, like, officially. And this specific copy is actually the extended edition, so it does have a bit more of the ending in it, so it kind of wraps up a little bit better, I'm pretty sure, than the normal version. I haven't read the specific version yet, so I'll have to let you guys know what I think when I do finally read this. But I just remember absolutely loving this book, and I'm so surprised that hardly anyone talks about it. I still think about it like all the time to this day, and I'm always wishing that I had had a sequel to this book because it really deserved it, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I just wish people had talked about it more. This one is one of my all-time faves, and it's kind of an older book, but you guys know it. I'm sure you guys can probably guess it, and it is Fairest by Gail Carson Levine, and this is one of my all-time favorite books from when I was in middle school, and then I recently read it, I think about 2 years ago, and fell in love with it again. And this is a book that I really want like everyone to read. If you like fantasy, this is definitely one that you need to reach out for like immediately. It is so beautiful. Basically, it's kind of a loose Snow White retelling. I don't know how to explain this book. Oh my gosh, I've read this so many times and I love this book. I can't explain it. So this book is about a girl named Aza, and she grows up in a country in the same world as Ella Enchanted, where they really value beauty and singing, but she is considered not conventionally attractive, so she's ridiculed for this. However, she has a really beautiful singing voice. So when she is sent to the castle, she is kind of brought under the queen's wing, and she ends up being the voice for the queen whenever there's singing going on. So she has learned to throw her voice to where she is singing, but it's not actually coming from her. It's kind of sounding like it's coming from the opposite side of the room. And it's such a cool story. So if you love Ella Enchanted, you're going to love Fairest because it's set in the same world, and some of the same characters show up a little bit and they're talked about a little bit. And I absolutely love this book so much. It's definitely one that I think a lot of people would love if they gave it a chance. And there's also a lot of talk about fat phobia in here. The character herself, Aza, is actually fat, and I really love the fat representation in this book. I think I've mentioned it in my fat representation video, and it's definitely a fantasy that you have to check out. It is so good, so classic, reads like a fairy tale, and it's beautiful. The next book on this list is Grace and the Fever by Zan Romanoff, and I read this book last year and it was one of my favorites from last year. And I absolutely loved this book so much. I was super hesitant to actually pick it up in the first place because I didn't really know what it was about, and I actually thought that it was an adult fiction book, but it's not. It's young adult, so that's really exciting and reassuring. And I ended up picking it up and freaking loving it. I flew through it so fast. I listened to a lot of One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer when I was listening to this book because Grace and the Fever is about Grace, and she is obsessed with a boy band, and one night she ends up meeting the lead singer from that boy band, and they get some paparazzi pictures taken of them unwittingly, and it ends up being kind of the talk of the town the next day, and everyone is trying to figure out who Grace is and who that girl was, who the rock star guy was hanging out with. So I really enjoyed this book, and I always describe it as sort of a well-polished, well-written fan fiction, and it's definitely true. It definitely reminds me a lot of the One Direction, Jonas Brothers kind of fan fiction that was back in the day and that I definitely read and took part of, and I absolutely loved it. It's so perfect. It like kind of fulfilled my need for fan fiction, and it's definitely a book that I could see myself rereading in the future. It's just absolutely beautiful. Like, even just the cover itself is gorgeous, but I really enjoyed the characters and the way that boy bands and boy band culture is portrayed in this book. And it's just awesome. Like, if you were in love with One Direction or 5 Seconds of Summer or Jonas Brothers or whoever, any kind of boy band, you're going to love this book. It's definitely a book for you. And I'm always surprised that it doesn't get more hype because I feel like so many people would love it. And it's just a fun book. It's not serious, it's not heavy, it's just super fun, and I love the realistic ending. Like you guys know, I love my realistic endings, and this is definitely one of those. If you're trying to look for like a fanfic ending, not exactly. This book kind of flips fanfic on its head, so beware of that. So this next book got a little bit of hype, but not quite as much as I wanted it to, and that is Annalie in Real Life by Janelle Milanes. And I absolutely love this book so much. This is about Annalie, and she's really obsessed with this video game. And there's this boy that she interacts with on this video game that she's never actually met, but she has a huge crush on. But issues in her real life start taking over when she ends up getting into this contract with this other boy in her school to start fake dating him so he can get his ex-girlfriend jealous, and she wants to get this guy jealous on the video game. So things start to kind of get a little muddy. And I absolutely loved this book so much. It has the amazing fake dating trope, and that's one of my favorite tropes of all time, so that was really exciting. Also, Annalie is fat, so there's fat representation in this book, and I just loved it. I read this book in one sitting, one night. It was so good. I absolutely love the ending. It's super realistic. It's not exactly a happy ending. It's kind of bittersweet, which is really nice. And I just love the way that this wrapped up. I want to read this book literally all the time, every day. Just reread it so many times. It's so perfect and amazing, and I loved it. I just noticed that there's a shadow right there, so I'm sorry if that's really distracting or annoying, but I don't know what else to do about that. So the next two books are actually part of a duology, and they are The Crown's Game and The Crown's Fate, both by Evelyn Skye, and these are some of my favorite books of all time. Like, as you can see, my favorite shelf is pretty empty right now, so I definitely wanted to include these books because they're so good, and almost no one talks about them. These books get so little hype, and they deserve literally all the hype. So these two books are basically historical fantasy, and they're set in Russia, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So basically this book is told in dual perspectives, and both of the characters are enchanters that are vying to become the Tsar's imperial enchanter. And I absolutely love this book. I love both of the main characters and just the way that they interact with each other and interact with magic and how different their magic is. Like, one of the main characters, her magic comes really naturally to her, and then the other main character, his magic doesn't come as naturally, but he is equally as powerful. And I also love the way that the games go and the way that they compete in them. and it's just such a fun book, and I'm so surprised that more people haven't read this book or read this duology series thing. And Evelyn Skye is just so amazing, and her writing is beautiful. She really does a good job at describing Russia and describing the culture in Russia. I also love that she mentions a lot of the Eastern Russian culture, especially where it starts to blend with Asian culture, because that doesn't really get talked about a lot in Russian inspired fantasies. And I was really happy that that happened in this one. One of the main characters, Nikolai, is actually Asian, and I just absolutely loved this book so much. This is also pretty similar to The Night Circus, so if you like The Night Circus, you're gonna love these books. I actually liked these ones more than The Night Circus, but yeah, I definitely recommend both of these books. The next one is a book that I try to talk about as much as possible, and that is Bring Me Their Hearts by Sarah Wolf, and I love this fantasy so much. I don't know what else I could say about it that I haven't said already. This book is basically about a girl, and she is a heartless, which means that her heart is controlled by a witch, and to get back her heart and to get back control of herself, she needs to embark on this quest to take the heart of the prince and bring it back to her witch, and there will be some sort of a trade-off. And I loved this book so much. This book was one of my favorite books of last year. It was amazing. I read it as an ARC, and then I ended up buying the physical copy. And it's kind of sad because I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this fantasy, but it's definitely one that I think a lot of people would enjoy. So if you're a fantasy reader and you haven't picked up this book, I definitely recommend you try it out. One of my favorites, absolutely gorgeous, has some great witches and magic and political intrigue, and it's definitely one of my favorites. I'm pretty sure the second book is coming out at some point in the next year or so, and I am just so ready for the sequel. The last three books are a series that you hear me talk about quite a lot, but I feel like I should mention now, and that is the Conqueror Saga by Kirsten White. That's And I Darken, Now I Rise, and Bright We Burn. And I love this series so much. These books are gorgeous. I finally have all of them in hardcover, and they're just so beautiful. And I just absolutely loved getting to read about Lada and Radu's story. This is a historical fiction retelling of Vlad the Impaler, and it's just so good. And the way that Kirsten White reimagined these characters and this part of history was just so intriguing and awesome and amazing and beautiful and heartbreaking, and wow, like Lada is literally the most badass character I have ever seen, and she gets such a bad rap like from everyone, and I just don't get it. Like some people are like, oh, she's just badass because she has a sword, and I'm like, she doesn't have a sword for a lot of the first book. So I don't really know what that means. Like, and it's always coming from people who have only read the first book, and I'm like, are you kidding? Like, first of all, Lada is really badass. She's badass from the freaking moment she was born. So I don't really understand why they think that Kirsten White just put a sword in her hands and was like, she's badass, because that's definitely not Lada's character. But I love these series so much. These books are just, they're everything to me. They're my all-time favorite series. I just love these books so much. And basically it's dual perspective, so you follow Lada. She's pretty ruthless and badass and doesn't care about anyone, doesn't care, you know, she will literally fight you any day, anytime. And then there's Radu, who's her little brother, and he's definitely like a soft boy, and I love him. He is so sweet. He's also gay, which is really cool that we have some gay representation in this book, or in this series. And what I love the most about this series in particular is that it doesn't feed into the bury your gays trope, which is really nice. So none of the gays die. I don't really want to call that a spoiler, so I'm not going to. And this is like it's like one of the best parts about the series, and it's so nice to see in historical fiction that gays can prosper and they're not gonna die, and it's so good. So if you really like some good queer representation, and if you really like historical fictions, kind of fantasy-esque, but not really fantasy, then definitely the Conqueror Saga is for you. And I Darken, Now I Rise, Bright We Burn. They're all amazing. They're all good. Check them out. Alright, so those were all the books I wanted to talk about today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Down below, let me know some of your kind of underhyped faves, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!